Welcome back to Cody Loves Comic Books. For this episode, I want to ask a question. And that question that's been on my mind, is does the auteur theory apply to comic books? So where this comes from is a handful of weeks ago, there was the Thought Bubble Comic Con in Europe. And given the current situation in the world, it was all done virtually. And I ended up watching a few interviews, but one of them was a conversation between Kelly Sue DeConnick and Emma Rios about their work on Pretty Deadly. And as part of this conversation, one of the things that came up was the question of authorship. And it was a really interesting conversation, and it's kind of been bouncing around in my mind for a while. I've been thinking about it, and it's come to the point where it made me ask this question of, well, does the auteur theory apply to comics? Now, so it's a little something about me that I haven't told you yet, is that my background from a critical thinking standpoint comes from film and film studies. That's actually what I studied in school. And in film, this question of authorship is referred to as the auteur theory. So I actually pull out one of my old textbooks, and if you're interested in film and film theory, or just how movies work, this is a really good book, and it's actually written by one of my professors, Bruce Kamen. So to that, let me just read here what the auteur theory is. All right. So auteur criticism posits that a significant film has an author or guiding creative intelligence. That person, usually the director, becomes the off-screen sight or implicit source of coherence. This is one way of accounting for the apparent intentionality of what is clearly a collaborative effort. A film like A Clockwork Orange could be analyzed not just as an independent work, but as a segment of Kubrick's artistic development. One might work up a bibliography or biography of Kubrick's imagination, arguing, for instance, that Kubrick has always been interested in irony and that he has found different ways to express it. So basically, this is one of the core principles of film theory, in that the director is the person that is in charge, or is that at the center of all the decision making of a film. And so if you want to go and compare multiple films, usually you look at the director and stack up their films and look for common themes, common looks, common just common techniques, any common threads between these films, to kind of understand what they're doing with the medium, what they're exploring, and so forth. And as Bruce Kamen here says, Kubrick is definitely one where this theory pretty clearly applies. I would say another one would be somebody like Hitchcock, Terry Gilliam, Quentin Tarantino. It's maybe Taika Waititi. The biggest thing is, to me, and even when I was in school, was, well, where it makes sense is when the director is clearly at the center of all the decision making, where you really have a clear sense that they're the ones that are making all of the creative decisions. Generally, I think it really helps if the director is the one that is writing, or if not writing, very closely related to the script that they're shooting as well, so that that the words that the actors are saying and the way that the story is unfolding is something that is in control of the director just as much as the visuals and so on. Where it kind of starts to break down is when that is not so clearly the case. And for a lot of films, I think that doesn't really apply, or it's hard to say that applies. And that's where, even when I was in school, that this is a theory that I never really, I really struggled with. Does it apply all the time? And I don't think it does. I think the answer is no. Especially as films get bigger, as films get more expensive, as studios get involved, as it becomes more and more murky whether or not the director is at the center of that decision-making process. That's where it becomes tricky. And that's a lot, kind of like an undercurrent of what this discussion between Kelly Sue DeConnick and Rios is just the difficulty of assigning authorship. And that's what's kind of been making me think about something like the auteur theory and applying it to comics. And I think, comics to a certain extent are a lot simpler than, or could be thought of as being a lot simpler than a movie, because the number of creative persons involved with creating a comic is much less, usually. So there's a lot less people to look at. Though I will say, what kind of complicates things is, many times the writer is not the artist. So the story and the words are not something that the artist is directly involved with necessarily. And so it becomes a tough question. That's where it's been kind of bouncing on my mind. Then you get studios involved, and it becomes even a little bit more murky of a question, because if a studio like, say, Marvel hires a writer and brings them in, they take on the story at point A, and maybe they have to end it at point B, and how they get from point A to point B maybe is up to them. And so maybe that's where they can use their kind of, their creative process and their control to do that, to navigate that. But maybe the studio is giving them narrower rails. Maybe they have to do X, Y, and Z in this process. And so, like, how much of the writer's creativity are you seeing? Or also in the case of a bigger comic book studio, like, maybe there's a house style of art. So an artist comes in and it's like, well, your art needs to look, sort of like this, or closer to that, or maybe they send some pages back and say, no, you've got to redo these because they need to be closer to this style or that, kind of limiting their creativity. So in those cases, the question of authorship becomes a little bit trickier. But conversely, there are some comic studios where, maybe the writer has a fully developed script, and the studio wants to pair them with the writer and be part of that collaborative process. Or maybe the studio wants the writer to work with an artist to have a developed, almost finished product that they bring, and basically then the studio is just involved with printing it and putting it out into the world, and not the names that you read on that book really are the ones that did create it. And to make matters even more murky, Kickstarter is now a platform where a lot of books are being published, self-published, by writers and artists, where they're doing it themselves. And in that case, where you have a writer or artist's hands very clearly on the work that they're doing and putting it out to the public themselves, well, then authorship is very clearly down to those two people. But even that being said, how a writer and an artist choose to work together is a question too, because sometimes it could be a collaboration, or maybe the writer just wants to hand the script off to the artist and never see it again, or anywhere in between. So it is a tricky question, and I think where I've kind of come down on it is that really the auteur theory is actually more complicated in comic books than even film these days. But I've kind of come to the conclusion that that's actually a really good thing. And the reason for that is because in this age that we are in, it has never been easier than it is now to, like, if there's a book that really speaks to you and that really grabs you and you're interested in, to go back and research, well, let me find some interviews, maybe on YouTube or written in a journal or on the internet or something, to see if I can find out what these people were doing, see what they say their process was. The perfect example I would give you here is Electro Assassin. It's one of my favorite books, and in going back and researching it to make the video that I did, that's where I discovered, well, that book was really a collaborative process between Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz. Frank Miller very clearly came in with a story, but then seeing Bill Sienkiewicz's art in the direction that Bill Sienkiewicz wanted to go with the story that he was originally presented with, all of a sudden things started to change, and both of them saying that was a collaborative effort. So in doing the research, it becomes clear that, well, if I want to dig into the creative process or the creative powers behind that work, I need to look at both Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz. And back to the original interview that sparked this, it was clear from my takeaway from that interview was, if you're looking at Pretty Deadly, and that's a book that you love, the creative process there, it is a collaborative effort between Kelly Sue DeConnick and Emma Rios. So if you like that book and you want to explore that creative process more, you need to look at both of those creators. And I think that once you know that, that's where all of a sudden comics open up to you even more. it's something that I think I've been kind of aware of as I've started to do research to make these videos, but it's been more subconscious. And then I was watching this video and kind of starting to think about it in these terms, and in these terms that I was more familiar with of the auteur theory, and does it apply or not, that I realized, like, well, this really, like, it's the incentive to kind of do a little bit more research on the books that you like. And once you know that, and what that process was, and in which the creators were the significant driving force behind those books, well, now that's somebody else that I want to investigate and pay attention to. You know, somebody like Kelly Sue DeConnick. You know, when she comes on to Aquaman, I've never read Aquaman in my life, but now I know Kelly Sue DeConnick's work, and I know that I'm interested in it, so I'm going to check out whatever she does on Aquaman, or you know, whatever work Bill Sienkiewicz pops up on currently. I want to see what he's doing. You know, Sonnet Takeda, what have you, Emma Rios. Any of these creators, once you understand kind of what their involvement is, and when you know what their involvement is in the work that you've done, now you know where to go back and look at what they've done before, and where to pay attention to what they're doing going forward. So I think that there's some huge advantages in having a clear picture of that creative process, and the importance for us as enthusiasts, as readers, and lovers of comics, to put in that effort and find out maybe a little bit more of the backstory on these stories that we love, so that we can appreciate all of comics better, you know, by following certain writers or artists or something. So it was, it's just kind of it felt like this was something that was significant enough that I wanted to kind of put it down into words as best as I could, which is to this point, or to put it onto a video like this, just to kind of get this thought out there, so that maybe it would help others appreciate comics more as well. So hopefully, if you've stuck around to this point, this is a helpful thought, a helpful perspective, and hopefully it brings you more enjoyment of comics, and honestly helps us to follow and support those creators that we love so much. So yeah, again, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this video is helpful. Hopefully you liked it, and yeah, thanks very much for watching, and thanks for your support. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next one.